Okay, now this is where we just thought we might kind of bring it together, bring it full circle, as Ian was saying. We've gone through the basics of occupancy. We've gone through the challenges with other methods. We've gone through some crazy exercises where we try to look for eights and among nines. We've run some analysis. We've just gone through a little quick review of how real data is collected and how it's put together. And then Ian gave us a very nice overview about sampling in the basics of sampling, which I think were so timely to really wrap up everything. What I'll just do is I'll just run you through very quickly a few additional applications of occupancy methods, and I'll not get into too many details just because we are short of time, but just to give you a quick flavor of what all occupancy-based surveys can be done. And by no means this list is a comprehensive one. It's just it's just like a few dots. And there are incredible applications. I'll just talk about them where occupancy methods are being used beyond just species distribution. Now, you all might remember we've explored this map several times. The most standard and the most basic use of occupancy surveys, which they call as the single season, single species model, is where you have data from a snapshot of time and you use it to estimate where the species is using it the space more, where is it using it less. This is broadly exactly the same example that we ran with eights and nines. Here, the same data was collected using transect segments, and we were able to estimate a similar map. In fact, the map that Ian also talked about. Now, this is the simplest form of analysis, as I said. The assumptions here are, or the assumptions here are that nothing is changing during the study. Uh, the occupancy or the distribution of the species is static during the time period what we are reporting here. And but the most important and relevant point here is that the surveys are reliable and replicable, and they're probabilistic. They're not binary, that this is where snow leopard is, this is where snow leopard is not, but they're far more than that. They address imperfect detection. They address possible absence with non-survey. A very important difference between many of the presence only uh, modeling methods that we have been seeing across the world for species distribution models. So in our case, what results we got, we have these two tables. Just to quickly review it, I'd just like to show you a couple of things here and how these match with the data that we had earlier collected and played around with the eights and nines. Just a second. Sorry, I had a little mouse disturbing me. Anyway, so the table on top, if you look at it carefully, it compares how various models performed, and we had around 27 models in this case. But you can see the model which performs best among these 27 models is the one that considers ruggedness within the sampling unit, vegetation index, effect of altitude, which is not linear. What it actually meant in this case, it was quite fascinating that we found the relationship with altitude to be like this. And if this was psi, then our and altitude. If this was psi, then as the altitude increased, probability of snow leopards using a sampling unit increased, and then beyond a certain altitude, it decreased. And that completely matches the ecological hypothesis here, where we know snow leopards do not use very high altitude areas because there's nothing for them to eat, or they prey to eat, and snow leopards do not tend to use very low altitude areas, again, because it's too low for them to have for the mountains. And then of course snow leopards avoid forests and so on. And you can see these relationship. This relationship here is actually coming from these two variables here. So if you remember, we did the exponential equation. You put the value of that exponential equation with these beta values, you will come up with a value of psi, which increases as altitude increases, and then at a certain point in time, it starts declining. Similarly, forest cover, the more the forest cover was, the less was the probability of a grid being used by snow leopards. And similarly, the case with vegetation index and ruggedness. So this is exactly how we simply ran a model based on field data collected from across 480,000 square kilometers, and were able to develop what Ian actually did the hard work over there to define it as one of the most reliable um, uh, distribution maps of snow leopards in the country. And moving forward, now that's one. There are various other models one can look at. Now, this is another one where all you need to do is you have to change the type from SO to SO.FP. This model tests the effect of certain covariates on the possibility of people or a survey reporting false presence. Now, thankfully, there's not much confusion between snow leopards and other carnivores, at least in Mongolia. But in some situations, people might either be too thrilled to report or be exhausted to misreport, or they might be high on weed, as Muzaffar mentioned, to just report almost all species. Now, thankfully, Muzaffar was able to detect that this person was not reporting right, and he was going yes for everything. But if there was a pattern that he saw, that there were certain people who were misreporting, certain characteristics that, or certain people who had the who had a higher chance of misreporting, then he would have tested this model in a way that he could have explored the possibility of false presence and make use of the data still. So now moving forward, I think Justine mentioned it briefly. Occasionally or many times you might be in a situation where you might want to rely upon not just one but many methods. Now consider a scenario. We started with that example that Justine showed in the Alai region. There were people representing or visiting every nook and corner of that landscape. So it was very easy for us to be able to use interview data. What if there is a landscape where a part of the landscape is where people visit, but a part of the landscape is where people have no access to, or for some reason they don't visit? It's out of reach, or it's a protected area, whatever. What happens in that case? In this case, you can use multiple methods. Now, here the example I've put here is you can even use a camera trap and sign survey. You can use camera trap, sign survey, and interview-based data. The only point one needs to keep in mind here is that in the probability of detecting a snow leopard on a camera is almost certainly going to be very different than the probability of detecting a snow leopard on a transect. And that might be completely different than the probability with which a person might recollect and report to you about the presence of snow leopard in a certain area. There could be different time periods involved. There could be different scales at which people are thinking. And all of those do make a bit of a challenge if you try to put them all together. Earlier, it used to be people used to have to exclude or data in a way that they would use a single method. But this method, the modeling approach, when it came out, it made life a lot easier. Occupancy methods now allow the flexibility of bringing together more than one method. In fact, not just method, but you can even go through multiple scales. You remember, occupancy is a scale dependent variable. Very small, your overall occupancy might be less. Slightly bigger, it'll be bigger. The occupancy values will get closer to 1. But the point being that if you have your data and you have to look at multiple scales, multi-method is what you can use as a modeling approach. Again, you might remember Justine mentioned this example that if you're looking for animal signs on a trail. Now, interestingly, for various reasons, snow leopards don't seem to use, or the snow leopard surveyors would seldom be able to use pug marks because of various reasons. There were very few sightings based on pug marks. But in case of tigers or leopards, if you are surveying on roads of tracks that animals use, which are a very good means to detect a species presence, there is a likelihood that if you see a tiger on this third segment, there's a very good chance that you will see the tiger's sign on the segment 4 and 4, and if you see it on segment 4, there is a fairly good chance that you'll see it on segment 5 and so on. Similarly, if you don't see a tiger on segment 1, there's a very little chance that you will see a tiger in segment 2 and so on. So the point being, there is a spatial correlation between between these segments, where if you detect it in one segment, you're much more likely to detect it in the next segment and so on. And the modeling approach, which uses correlated detections, allows this to be addressed as an issue. There's a recent paper, I think we might have already shared it, but if not, we'll share it again, where we used it for common leopards distribution. Just give me a second, please.
Muted, Kastub.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, so Justine mentioned this briefly in her presentation. There might be an opportunity where you might have two species in interacting with each other in a landscape. Now, think about it. Many times we noticed people wish to use prey data as a covariate. The problem with that is, unless you're dead sure about how the prey data, how the prey is distributed, uh, if you use it as a covariate, you're assuming that the grids in which there were no detections of prey, there was no prey. Now that's a huge leap of faith, because you basically, even for prey, even though it's more widespread and more easily visible than a snow leopard, you're still making a huge assumption that if there is prey, you will end up seeing it. Now, in some situations, maybe it is a possibility. In other situations, if it is not, in those cases, you might need to look at multiple at two species interactions. And in this case, like in this one, the snow leopard and lynx, they might be competing with each other. So you can explore cooperation, competition, and other such relationships with these two species models as well. And it allows some fascinating insight uh, into the niche separation and niche overlap between species. In fact, there's a manuscript which is right now in review, where one of our colleagues, she's estimated the relationship between two of the primary snow leopard prey, Argali and ibex, and she's exploring how the two species are interacting with each other. Are they competing? Are they Are they cooperating, or are they simply staying away from each other? So those kind of relationships can potentially be estimated with the two species models. Um, Now the same model with a slight twist. It's always possible for a species to be misidentified. Species ID can at times be uncertain, exactly what we discussed earlier. And in this situation, again, you might have a subset of detectors where the persons or a scenario leading to a mistaken ID, please identify it so that you can improve your inference. So the same two species models with mistaken or with false positives is what can also be explored and modeled within the occupancy framework. Now, quickly moving to the slightly more complex series of models. Again, Justine gave a quick example of this. So far, we've looked at single season models. Now, occupancy methods allow flexibility of being used across time. And the additional parameter, as Justin indicated, I'll just explain to you. But basically, look at it this way: the same site, you go in, let's say, 2020, then you go there in 2021, and then you go there in 2022. You go there in 3 different seasons, or you go out and interview people. You ask them about what was the situation in 1990, and you ask them the situation, what was the situation in 2020. You ask them these two things, so they there can be more than one season that you're talking about, and season is nothing but a chunk in time. the, Again, the assumptions remain the same, that within a season occupancy doesn't change, so there will be always a snapshot of time at least within the season that you'll have to take care of. But what does happen is, and in this case, for instance, between season 1 and season 2, in this little sampling unit, the snow leopard went locally extinct for whatever reason. Maybe people killed it, maybe it just something else happened. The snow leopard simply abandoned this site. What has happened is, this particular site, let's say site A1, has undergone local extinction. And that's the parameter you see, epsilon, season 1 to season 2. That process between season 1 and season 2, which was, let's say, if you're doing the surveys in June, July, August, and then the next year survey you're doing again in say June, July, August again, then in those 12 months, actually those 9 months, that local extinction has taken place. And that's the time between two seasons, which is very important to estimate. Many times we've seen some analysis where you have a continuous data. You have data in continuous time. So you have year 1, year 2, year 3, and data is collected through the year. People many times just pull them together and say between year 1 and year 2 things have changed. What you're basically doing is you're assuming that at the strike of midnight something has happened. So you always must make sure that if you're using multiple year data, one needs to bring in a time in between which allows the extinction or colonization to happen. Otherwise, you're just saying at the strike of midnight something has suddenly changed, which may or may not, which almost certainly may not be true. Now, in this case, what has happened is between season 2 and season 3, something happened, and then a new snow leopard from another area got dispersed and started using it again. So now what has happened is, the site has undergone what we can call as local colonization, with a certain probability of colonization. And in this first case, there was a certain probability with which local extinction had taken place. So that's how the multi or the dynamic occupancy model or multiple season model work. And the paper that Justine mentioned, Julia's paper that Abhishek mentioned earlier, he came and gave a little talk. These were all using multi-season occupancy analysis. Now, here another possibility: you may have a species again, but you might miss ID. There is a possibility of misidentification. So again, further complication if you can add false presence even in multiple season data. Now, this is the last couple of them, and then I'll stop here. But imagine pathogens or diseases that may or may not be present in a species. Now, you may have a situation where neither the species nor the pathogen is present. That's scenario, let's say season 3, what you're seeing there. You may have a scenario where there might be a species is occurring, or the host species is there, but there is no pathogen. Or there might be a scenario where some of the species may have the pathogens as host, but again, please note, I mean, we've all seen how COVID tests are going. You don't always detect pathogens with 100% certainty. So now these are the kind of models which can be called as multi-state models, where you look at more than just presence and absence, but you grade the presence into categories. It can also be true for a lot of snow leopards, few snow leopards, no snow leopards. So even that kind of a multiple state is something that can be estimated using the multi-state models, depending on how much signs you see or how many encounters you get. And again, as I mentioned earlier, Interactions between two species can be hugely valuable when looking at multi-season models, especially in light of possible phenomena of mesopredator release, competition, or cooperation between species as well. So that's really it. I think, yeah. Well, of course, here one species goes extinct, the other comes in, but that truly summarizes. Hold on. Right. Yeah. So that sort of summarizes what we set out to do during the last four sessions. We wanted to do a bit of a pros and cons, but I think we're already 25 minutes too late. Maybe if you're okay with that, we might do an email exchange where we can request you to share what are the pros and cons of using occupancy methods so that we can initiate some discussion and clarify a few points if there are any. But in the meanwhile, if any of you has any suggestion or comment or question, please just jump in and put it in the. Yes, Haqiq, the examples for these models would be definitely great. In fact, what we've done so far is just one, which is single occupancy. Um, we'll see. I mean, ideally, I would suggest that we go into phase 2, phase 3 of distribution surveys, and that could be one way of looking at other models. The other one could be I can happily share some resources. All of these models that we just spoke about, they're all published and open access. So we'll definitely share these models and the papers which describe these modeling approaches. But yeah, let's see. It depends on Raki and Justine if they would like to do a follow up on distribution surveys to get a little further deep into multi-season and false presence and other kind of modeling approaches. Great. Okay, snow leopard prey interaction model manuscript. So Haqiq, you mean the one between Ibex and Argali, right?
Yes, you just mentioned it in the interaction.
Sure. Yeah. The moment it's out, I think we should be able to share with you.
Thank you.
Certainly. No problem.